Hello everyone. As you can tell by this gorgeous scenery behind me, we are no longer in freezing cold Rhode Island.
The Watermaker was our last project, and as soon as we could, we hightailed it south because it was getting cold. But before we share our adventures with you, we wanted to give you an overview and a recap of what we did this summer.
Yeah, just a few of the tips, tricks, things we learned for anyone who's going to be doing big refits yourself, a few things to consider. So, as I've said a few times, sit back, relax, we're going to go inside, and then we'll talk boats. Now that we're inside and comfortable, let's start a chat, shall we?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and try to cover quite a lot of things just around refitting a boat in general. Kind of why we chose to do it, all the things we did.
Yes, everything.
It's going to be a lot. We're going to put descriptions, time codes down in the description. So if there's something in particular that you're interested in, you can go check those out. But I figure let's start off with the basic question.
Yeah.
Why did we choose to refit Starry Horizons?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah. I'll let you take that one first.
All right. Well, at the end of our circumnavigation, we talked about whether we wanted to keep Starry Horizons or whether we wanted to do something different. And the consensus was we wanted to keep Starry Horizons, but make some changes to her. Not only were we not going to be crossing oceans anymore, but we were closer to home and technology had moved around, and there were a lot of things that we thought we could improve on Starry Horizons when we were looking at her for a different type of cruising.
Yeah, I think you made a very important point there that technology had changed a lot from when we had first gotten Starry Horizons. Like when we first,
8 years ago.
Yeah, it's goodness. You put it that way, that just sounds crazy.
Over 8 years ago.
So the technology changing so quickly, so much, we felt that when we put Starry Horizons together, she was a very well thought out, very technologically advanced boat. But we met other boats in the Bahamas, and I was just constantly being like, oh, that's a really cool idea what they've done over there. So I think it was time. Yes. Upgrade. Just a little bit.
For sure.
So now, one of the things you kind of touched on is some of the other options that we considered, and I feel like it's worth fleshing that out just a little bit more in terms of, like, we've never set out saying that sailing and cruising is going to be our entire lives. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Yeah. So going back to land, that was an option. Mm-hmm. And I think both of us would have been okay if that was kind of the way we ended up going. It's not quite the same level of beautiful open seas adventure.
A lot more hiking and seasons.
There we go. Yeah. Definitely a slightly different thing. But it was an interesting thing because we had accomplished this goal of sailing around the world, and without that goal, it was kind of what's next.
Yes.
And land was definitely an option there. We did talk about a different boat, and it was a very interesting conversation. There's so many people who seem to be moving on to the next boat.
Yep.
Would you say? Yeah.
Lots of YouTube channels changing their boats.
That's yes. So we talked a lot about that. Just like technology has changed, there's a lot of new boats and boat models out there. So there's some things I was really intrigued by, but we kept coming back to Starry Horizons is such a good platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
We really like
the living space. We really like that we've got this boat set up that we know that no other owner has had. This is, a single owner boat, and we know everything about our girl.
I mean, so if something has gone wrong, I know who to curse out because it's most likely that I've done it. So
or FP.
Sure, we'll let them have some of the blame sometimes. Yeah. So there were definitely a few options we considered, but putting it all together, keeping Starry Horizons, and like I said, not doing ocean crossing, but kind of a little more seasonal cruising, Caribbean, East Coast, staying closer to home, family, friends that we'd been away from for so long, was a big draw for us.
Yeah. So after we decided to refit Starry Horizons, we had to decide what we were going to do and where we were going to do it. So to tackle the first one, I looked at locations around the east coast of the U.S. that can haul a boat of our size, which is not a lot.
fairly limited choices.
It is limited. Starry Horizons has a 24 and change foot beam, and that's really the restriction. So I came up with a list of places that could haul us, basically from the Florida-Georgia border, which is where our insurance covers us for hurricane season, all the way up to Maine.
Pretty far north.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking like, I didn't ask around in Nova Scotia, but no. There was a limited number of yards, a limited number, and then I contacted all of them, and some of them said, well, we don't really take long term. We don't haul out with like a mast of your size. We have this rate here, and we're like,
there's a lot of restrictions, y'all. It's a challenge to try to find something that can accommodate us for the length of time, etc.
Yeah. And also could do the work. So we had this list of projects that we wanted to have done, and we had a few things that really, really needed an expert to come in. And some yards don't have welding expertise on hand or other things that we used. So that was a limiting factor as well.
I will say that was a really key one for me in terms of there's a whole nother depth that you can get into with a refit. We chose to do a lot of work ourselves. We'll talk about that a bit more. But managing work being done by others, it's almost a full job by itself. So we were hoping to find a yard that we could kind of have trust and faith in for them to accomplish the stuff that we needed them to do. So that was also further limiting our options, I would say.
And one last thing we considered was we are going to be working on the boat a lot for what ended up being like 4.5 months. And in the summer, we didn't want to do it in like the Chesapeake Bay where we spent the previous summer, and it was very hot and not a lot of wind, and it was pretty miserable. Even just cruising, never mind working in a shipyard for 8 to 10 hours a day.
Yes, and I sweat a lot as a general rule, so having to do that whole refit process just buried down in the holes and all that stuff would have been no fun. So we chose
New England Boat Works
in Rhode Island.
In Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
And as a general rule, I'd say we really enjoyed that area, right?
The area was fantastic. Like, we had a great time in the region, and the weather was fantastic. So I think we did pretty good on that front.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I would say is that we did really well contemplating the summer weather, but not so much when you consider the extended time in the later part of the year weather.
We had hoped to like cruise a little bit in the fall, and that did not work out because we had too much stuff to do. So it was a very, very busy summer and fall and late fall, and there was ice on the boat, and we needed to get south.
Yeah, so you're never going to find something absolutely perfectly like weather-wise, but on the whole, I would say it was better for us to have the milder weather in the summer. That worked out quite nicely.
Yeah. Now that we've picked out our yard, we needed to make a list of all the projects that we wanted to do over the summer and try to prioritize them and figure out what was really important.
Yeah, and the biggest thing everything revolved around was electrical. I think that's where the biggest advances had been made, and I'll start there. Solar. If you've watched kind of our videos that we put through this whole refit, you can tell just how excited I am for the solar. And so that was the big one for me. And the basis behind that was we wanted to go as much off-grid, fully capable as possible.
Without repowering our engines. Yeah.
Yeah. So solar, the electrical, meant ripping out the generator. It meant getting rid of our shore power frequency converter that we had. It meant rewiring all of our shore power. It meant going full on energy efficient. 12-volt water maker, 12-volt air conditionings, like energy efficiency was the key. Everyone asks, why did you decide to make this decision? Well, it's because the energy efficient one.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's probably pretty fair.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest bucket.
Yes. The second biggest bucket was something we were a little delayed on doing after circumnavigating for 8 years and sailing a lot of miles. And that was rigging and sails. We needed to take our rig down, replace parts of it, inspect it, and then we also needed to get new sails.
Yeah, I will say this was something I was really pleased about being up in New England with. Mr. Tim Leary was fantastic for being super patient, answering the millions of questions I had going through that whole thing. But I feel like I know our rig a lot more after going through this whole process, and we've upgraded it a lot too.
It was super interesting.
Yeah, so that was another really big one. Now, with all the work that we did to the boat, it's inevitable that there was going to be fiberglass work that had to be done. And I'm really lucky because someone volunteered to learn how to do it.
In all of our time cruising, we've almost never been happy with the fiberglass work that contractors come in and do. And this was like, okay, let me go ahead and learn it. And thankfully, I got to partner with Total Boat in New England, and they gave us a lot of supplies, and I was able to learn how to do fiberglass and gel coat. And that's really biting me in the butt now because I got to fix everything on the boat.
I have a very easy person to turn to and be like, oh, look at those scratches there.
Who chipped that fiberglass? I guess I got to put Amy to work.
Yeah. So those were probably like the biggest buckets, if you will. But then what probably takes as much time as all the rest of those are all the miscellaneous projects.
We did so many small things all over the boat. For example, we got new cushions, interior and exterior. I did a woodworking project. I built pull-out drawers for my galley, which was a lot of time. We replaced a lot of miscellaneous things around the boat that just needed replacing, little small parts, and yeah.
Now, one thing I would like to touch on, I'm going to have you describe this because this is right in your wheelhouse. How did we decide which projects we wanted to do?
Yes. First of all, we had projects that were high priority, like we have to do them because we're overdue, like the rigging and the sails. Then we also prioritized our projects to say, like, how much are they going to cost in terms of time and money and effort versus how much are they going to change our life. So the solar arch was a high cost, high effort project. But it also really changed our life because we don't have the generator, we don't have the shore power converter, we don't have to run our generator every 4 or 5 days, we have less spare parts that we have to carry, etc., etc., etc. So we get to run air conditioning more often because our batteries are full every day. Just by the miracle of the sun.
Hey,
it's
spoilers
amazing.
over there. Spoilers.
Sorry.
Yeah. But so that was what I wanted to touch on is we really went through and listed out like there's probably 100+ different things on this list that we tried to put out there, and like we just threw everything at it and said, where does this fall on that priority matrix? And based off that, it was helped us prioritize what we were trying to do for the refit itself. And not everything has to be like, this is something the boat has to have. There are quite a few things on there that were like, we want to do this.
Yeah, for sure. There are plenty of things that are like, well, this would improve our lives a lot, and it's not necessary in getting from point A to point B or being safe, but it's comfortable and it makes us happy, and if it doesn't cost that much, then why not do it?
Yeah. Well, it was easy for me to think that at the time, and then like, a few months later when we're working on everything, I said, yeah, maybe that was too many projects on the list.
We definitely had some things that got bumped down from higher priority items to lower priority items, and then they didn't get to this season, so we have to decide, reevaluate.
I will also say there was something on the flip side too, where things that weren't necessarily on that list to start with, as we started working on projects, we're like, oh yeah, well, we're working on this. It makes sense to tackle this at the same time. Definitely it was a very detailed conversations, I would say, to try to figure out where everything fit. But we ended up getting it working, I think, for both of us. Yeah. And I'm really pleased with all the things we ended up getting done. So next question for you. What project are you most excited about that we worked on?
I really like our new cushions. Because we made improvements to certain spots around the boat, and they are more comfortable and in a lot of ways, and they look great. And I picking out the fabric was really challenging to find something that kind of still matched what we had but was better, and I think we did a really good job.
That has definitely been a big improvement, I would say, for sure.
I mean, that was a low effort on our part because somebody else made all the things. I do also really like my drawers because that was a lot of work to put them in, and I get to use them every day.
It really has changed the galley just in terms of how much extra space and use there is in there. So full props on that one, babe.
What about you?
I think this comes as absolutely zero surprise to anyone watching this. The whole solar and electrical stuff was just something I was super excited about from the beginning. And, you know, as you said, it has been game-changing for us, like, since we've been here in the Bahamas. And I've been keeping lots of data. I'm sure no one's surprised about that. We'll talk about kind of how that has actually worked while we've been down here cruising. But we've been off-grid since we've been in the Bahamas. Like,
yes.
Haven't run an engine at all for battery charging.
Last season in the
Pretty
Bahamas, we filled up with diesel 3 times.
I think so.
And we are probably going to make it through the season without filling up with diesel.
It's going to be amazing. The boat's quiet, nice, pure, clean, green energy. Honestly, another thing I didn't really expect was the solar array kind of sticking off the back of the boat. Does actually add a lot more shade back there. It feels bigger.
Because of the way the sun aligns, like one of the back transom is in shade most of the time. And having that is like a big difference. It really gives us more room.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, talked about our projects.
Yep.
Let's talk about decisions during the whole refit.
Yes.
The good decisions that we made.
Good decision number 1 was not staying on the boat while we worked
Definitely
on the
number
projects.
1.
Which I know that there are plenty of people who do stay on their boat for long-term projects, and no shade to them whatsoever, more power to them. It's very impressive. We really enjoyed having space away from the boat. Even though we were in the yard, towards the end, it was 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, or maybe even 12 hours a day. But for most of the refit, we could come home and like pick up dinner out, or I could cook something, and we could, you know, go to the farmer's market or eat out and do all these things that like made it feel like real life. And that was really nice. We had air conditioning and good internet and only a 15-minute commute most of the time, which was nice.
That worked out really well. And I will expand on that just a bit to say it was really helpful for me to have that separation, because we could be in the boatyard working on the boat, but then we would leave. And if you're living on the boat at the same time, it's especially challenging because the boat is a disaster zone when you're working on it. And if you're having to clean up and do things to make the boat livable for a night before diving back into projects the next day, it's just that much more effort and frustration that would go into it, I'd say.
It is so stressful. And I don't know if this is like a me thing, but to see things taken apart and have stuff everywhere and not be able to find things that you need, and it was just, it would have been really, really hard for, I think, our mental health to live on the boat.
And I think we had a bit of an experience. Like, we have lived on the boat, on the hard, throughout our travels. Like, we've done that in New Zealand. We've done that in a few other places as well. Australia. So we have that experience. We know what it's like, which is why we chose not to do it, because it just wasn't a whole lot of fun, and this was definitely kind of just better for us.
Yeah.
I'll also say another really good decision was getting a car. And it's just amazing when you sit there and realize like how much you have to go run errands and not being able to get somewhere.
How many times did I go to Port to Ace Hardware?
Yeah.
A lot.
A lot. Yeah, I mean, Portsmouth Ace Hardware is kind of like the closest thing to West Marine that's there, because
it was an excellent hardware store, so thank you.
Yeah, it worked out pretty nicely. But when you're not mobile, man, it's a challenge to get some of the things done that you need quickly. So being able to be mobile was super helpful. And then going back to the separating away from the boat, having a car meant that we could actually get away and explore some of Rhode Island and stuff like that. Go and visit some friends who lived in the area and whatnot. Now, this is perhaps a bit of a U.S.-centric thing, because having a car, especially in the U.S., is almost required in a lot of areas to be able to get around.
I do think it's very interesting that of our last 3 haul outs in the United States, they were all like pretty far from, I'm going to say, civilization or supplies. In Virginia, it was even worse because it was like a 40-minute drive to the nearest hardware store. So Portsmouth was better than that, thankfully. Like, the marina facilities were really nice, and there was a hardware store about 15 minutes away and a restaurant on site, but it wasn't like walkable or anything.
Yeah, and to get somewhere to find anything did require that car.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about doing the work ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I tentatively put that in the good decision bucket. Mostly because it was a lot of work to do things ourselves. But doing it ourselves meant that we could keep costs down, and on a refit with the scale that we did, labor costs would have been astronomical, which they still were. But also, like, we have learned a lot, and I feel we do really good quality work. So the things that we've done, I feel really confident in that it's going to hold up well. It's well installed. So I'm really pleased kind of knowing that, and knowing everything inside and out makes a big difference for me. Just, we live on the boat, we work on the boat. So
Yeah.
if I've installed it, I know how to fix it, theoretically.
A big lesson from 8 years of boat owning is that no one cares about your boat like you do. And as I said before, like, fiberglass and gel coat was something that we had done a lot, little pieces here and there, and nobody ever did a good job, it seemed. So that's just a prime example of how we could not know anything, but for trial and error and watching videos, we could learn a lot and do a better job than some professionals.
Yeah.
Some professionals. Not
There
all.
are really good professionals out there.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But we're generally pretty talented people.
We are.
Yeah.
And it was nice to, like, learn new skills. Like fiberglass, now that I have to patch all the time.
You're really going to regret that one someday, aren't you? So, okay, that's an interesting transition. Bad decisions.
Our biggest bad decision was expecting estimates to be accurate.
Now, I can hear your eyes rolling behind the camera. Yes, estimates are never 100% accurate. And we knew that going in. Mm-hmm. But what else do you have to base your projects that you want to have worked on? You have to get an estimate and start somewhere. Now, there's a lot of work that Safe Harbor NEB did for us that we're really pleased with. The solar arch and Chris, I thought, was amazing. Yeah. Like, the work he's done, everyone who's come on the boat comments how great it looks. However, the estimates that they originally put out there for every single project they did for us was woefully inaccurate.
Yes.
So things ended up being extremely more expensive than we had originally thought for the work that we didn't do ourselves.
Yes. I can understand going over budget, it happens, but to be over as much as they were was really, really hard. And also, your hands are tied because they say, well, it was an estimate and we are spending more now and we're paying for good labor, and we understand that. But at the same time, our hands are tied because they are already starting to work on the thing and they have the solar panels already and we can't move them and the boat's where it is, and we're kind of screwed. And I don't know how people would do that when they can't afford the difference.
Let's talk about some of the overall lessons that we learned during the refit. I would say the biggest one for me is time estimates.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter whether it's yourself trying to estimate time or, contractors or yards that you're trying to work on, everything is going to take longer than you think. And like, we've got 8 years of life on the boat.
We know this happens.
We generally know this happens. And when we were talking about all those projects that we were doing, I said, I felt we were relatively generous trying to estimate how much time we thought it would take.
Yeah.
How did our time estimate end up working out, babe?
Not good.
Not excellent.
Not good. Yeah. I think we thought we were planning for like a month of work in the yard. And we ended up doing 3.5 months in the yard and then another month when we launched. And that was in part because we had a lot of things to do, but also because the yard and the contractors took a while, took longer than we anticipated. Both the rigging, the solar array, welding, all of these things took far longer than expected.
Yeah, and when that happens, kind of the work that we had originally scoped out for ourselves, when the yard takes longer, well then, we've got more time to do more projects. So that kind of like just kept building and building and building on itself, which certainly didn't help. But it was challenging, I'd say, just to kind of get an accurate estimate from ourselves, the yard, everyone, just how long things were going to take. So if you're going to be planning on a long extended refit, just know it's going to be even longer and extended than you're thinking.
Yeah.
So plan ahead for that one. Now, trying to mitigate that, project management type stuff, did we do anything good there?
One thing we did that was very good in the beginning was like doing a lot of research and planning out the different steps for each project. So for a project like the solar arrays and redoing a lot of the electrical work, we knew in advance that we needed connections, we needed wires, we needed fuses, and blah, 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 blah.
List went on and on and on.
And before we left the boat, we were able to place orders for these parts to come in and kind of collect things in advance to make sure that we had the things that we needed. I think that it really helped that NEB had an Amazon locker because they will just deliver parts, fairly quickly and just leave them wherever, and you don't have to check in with the office like packages that came into the office were kind of hard to track down sometimes. So unfortunately, Amazon's pretty great about that. What else?
Yeah, I think really trying to start out with a decent collection of components in mind at the start of a project really helped and smoothed out a lot of things. It was inevitable that as I got into projects that a new component would come up, or as I'm sitting there looking at it's a better way to kind of route it like this, or mount things this way would be a better way to do it, which necessitates a different part or something. So either you have to hope that the kind of ship store at NEB had the part I was looking for, or then we had to order something, which would then delay that project. But if I was smart and had another project kind of all lined up that maybe wasn't quite as timeline critical, I could jump back and forth between projects. So it was very difficult for me sometimes to be like, all right, divide focus between one project that is maybe the one I really want to get done, but I'm waiting for something to be delivered. So, okay, put a pin in that one for a minute and go work on the other one. And then kind of once the other components came back, then I could jump back in and keep working on the project that was the top of mind project. So the actual project management side and trying to keep things moving forward constantly and just recognizing that there were going to be those hiccups and not just like letting my whole day or week or whatever get ruined, I think did help us be as efficient as we could.
Yeah.
Even though it still took us longer than we thought.
For sure.
Now, one of the things I will say that really impacted, I feel, the lack of accurate timeline estimate on my side was I just did not fully realize how little thought some of these boat manufacturers give to working on the boat after it comes out of the factory. We've done a lot of work on Starry Horizons in the time we've owned it, but this level of refit was a whole new ballgame.
Yeah. There are parts of our boat that are not designed to come apart, even though there are fixtures behind them that need regular replacing. And there are things that are glued in and things that were installed prior to the two molds coming together. So it's like impossible to do anything about it. Wiring spaces are really tight, And that's always been like a source of a lot of expletives over here.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is quite a bit of a challenge. So just, it would be nice if they gave a little bit more forethought to that, but I get it. That's not what they're building and selling these boats for. But just, it was harder than I expected to get into some of these places that I wanted to be working in. So that was an extra challenge, kind of a lesson learned.
A final lesson we learned was to stay organized with projects because, as we mentioned, it's mayhem. And things need to be labeled, tools need to be kept track of. We needed extra supplies and we needed to not lose them. So for example, with us both working on projects, we got like his and hers ratcheting screwdrivers. We also had to buy some things to make our life more comfortable. We got like a water cooler, we got plywood so we could have like workstations. There was a lot of stuff that we perhaps didn't organize as well as we could have, but we definitely like learned and got better as we went through.
Yeah, one thing for me especially was at the beginning part of a project, if you're dismantling a cabinet or trying to get access to an area and you're undoing screws or bolts or whatever, inevitably, I tell myself, I'll remember what these bolts or screws are for. And then how much longer later and you're like, what are all these random miscellaneous parts doing here? So
Yeah.
That is something I recognize I'm not particularly good at, and Amy was definitely very helpful in being like, all right, we need to separate these out, put them in little baggies, and label, and yes. Very, very important. Try to get that at the start of the project so that when it comes to putting things back together, a few less expletives if you are properly organized in doing that. Now, it is hard for me to remember to do that at the start, but it's really worth it.
It is worth it.
Yeah. So, anything else kind of you think is really worth kind of the big lessons learned, or?
I think that's it. I think that was pretty good.
Now, let me ask you another question that you haven't prepared for us. This is straight off the cuff. Would you do it again?
I am very happy with the boat right now.
That's a very diplomatic answer there.
I think Starry Horizons is pretty great, and I don't know that we could have worked out any better way to get the things done that we needed to. Like, I don't think we should have handed over any projects to contractors or taken on more ourselves. I think that maybe spending more time in the beginning in the yard and like working really hard would have made it easier towards the end. I don't know. It's really tough. Like, we legitimately thought that we would have time to sightsee in Rhode Island and we would have time to go cruising at the end of fall. And that didn't happen. And we ended up like working really hard.
Yeah. I mean, it was full on, in addition to being in the boatyard, we were
working on videos,
or writing or other fun projects that hopefully we'll soon be talking about. So there was just a lot going on at the same time. It was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. So as much time as we ended up taking, there probably still could have been room for more time. But at some point, you have to be out. You have to go and leave, and it gets cold, and all of these things. So
now, if David were to tell me at the end of this cruising season that we need to haul out and work again for 4.5 months, I would say no. But I don't think we need to, knock on wood.
Yeah.
And I think we're very comfortably set up for the next 5 years of cruising.
I will say, kind of as a last thought, is that what we have done to Starry Horizons was transformative. It was really important for us to lay out the projects that we wanted to do and just get them done. So the idea now being Starry Horizons is back in a nice sweet spot, and we shouldn't really have any big major changes that need to be made over the next 4 to 5, however many years that we want to keep on cruising. So it was a lot of work. It was a lot of effort, but I think it's going to be worth it.
Good job, babe.
Yeah. All right, so with that, I think that covers pretty well general thoughts on refit and all that fun stuff. So thank you guys so much for watching. The next video coming up should be sailing down to the Bahamas.
And
first view of how things have worked out.
And let us know if you have any questions in the comments.
Oh, that's always a good one.
Yeah, if you have any questions about our refit, let us know. And if we get a lot of questions, maybe we'll do a Q&A later.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for watching, everyone. We will see y'all later.
Bye.